Chicago's mayor says sayonara. Meanwhile, a top legislator says he's been cleared in a sexual harassment case. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Jaclyn Driscoll, NPR reporter. Welcome, Jaclyn.
Thank you.
And also Charlie Wheeler, director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at University of Illinois, Springfield. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good. Well, this week, Rahm shell, as one headline writer put it, Rahm Emanuel says no mas. He's not going to run for mayor of Chicago next year. This surprised, apparently, just about everybody. Should they have been surprised? What do you think?
I think, yeah, they were. I think they were genuinely surprised. They did not expect it. He, as recently as maybe less than a week ago, it looked like it was full steam ahead. He had scheduled events, campaign events. He's raised a ton of money.
Sure.
And there was no inkling that he was going to bow out. Now, when he bowed out, he said, this is the job of a lifetime, but it's not a job for a lifetime. And so he wanted to spend more time with his family, he said. And he said, yeah, and he said he was sure had he run, he would have won, but he basically didn't want to have to go through that hassle. Now, his opponents, the 12 people who are preparing to run against him, the challengers, all said, in the words of one, Lori Lightfoot, he knew he was going to lose. And so his pride wouldn't let him run and get beaten.
I think this was a political landscape that Emanuel hadn't seen before. I think with Trump in the White House and Bruce Rauner in the top position of Illinois, Emanuel's more of a centrist Democrat, and we're seeing a lot more of these very liberal, far left Democrats looking for their place, and this would have been really difficult. I think a very difficult race for him, even though he did claim victory.
Yes. Well, you know, the thing about Emanuel is that he thrives on this kind of stuff. I mean, this is a guy that doesn't dislike campaigning. I mean, nobody wants to go out and ask for money, but he's a political animal, I think, in a way that's just baked in. It's what he thrives on. And he also has a reputation, probably deserved, of being able to see around corners, perhaps earlier than some other folks. I mean, he was instrumental when he was in Washington, D.C. in promoting the Democratic agenda and getting Democrats elected to office. I do wonder, was he seeing around corners here? I mean, we had, when Laquan McDonald broke, people weren't giving Emanuel much chance for re-election. Could that case have and you've also got the violence in Chicago. Were these bigger issues than the mayor perhaps thought? Well,
the case is happening, and I think that this was a way for, I do think Emanuel might have seen that this would have been difficult because of the Laquan McDonald case particularly, and this was kind of a way to get out in front of it and not, if he wasn't going to run, be seen as his choice not to run to be seen as a reaction to how that case played out. So I think he was trying to get ahead of it a little bit.
Yeah, and if you recall, the actual release of the tape did not occur until after the election of 4 years ago.
Correct.
And there are many people who say had that come out before the election, Emanuel would not have won.
Sure.
Now, I would look at it and I would suspect that had he stayed in the race, he would have emerged from the primary, so to speak. You have 12 people running, they're all running against Emanuel. He's just got to get more votes, let me back up. He's got to come in one or two. And my guess, with that many people running against him, appealing to different constituencies, ethnically, racially, and so on, the odds of him not being number one or two are pretty slim.
Sure.
And so then the question is, in the final, when it's him and somebody else, do the adherents of the other 11 get behind that one other survivor, so to speak, and would their pluralities be sufficient to topple Emanuel. And maybe that's what he was looking. He's looking ahead. Yeah, he can get through the first round, but
Right.
second round, he may have a problem.
Well, he was pushed harder than he had been expecting last time around.
Yeah.
And, you know, there.
And as I
there's-
say, had that tape come out before, there's a good chance that he might not have won.
Yeah, and there was a good case to be made, frankly, that the settlement with the McDonald family, that was accomplished in a hush-hush sort of manner to get in front of this thing so it didn't become an election issue. And clearly it was going, you know, and we don't, to be fair, you know, he's got a lot more than McDonald on his hands here. We had, what, 36 people shot in Chicago in one recent weekend. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. You've got issues with the public schools there. I mean, at what point do issues, whether you have, you know, acute control of them, fast control of them, or just, you know, kind of beyond your control, at what point does the weight of that become more than your selling points?
But he did have some things to hang his hat on. He pointed that out at his press conference. You know, the full-day kindergarten, he's raised minimum wage. He's brought a lot of businesses to Chicago. It's a thriving city, but he did lose a lot of his voting base, so I think he recognized that it was going to be a difficult venture.
Yeah,
had he
and the flip
continued.
side is he closed a number of schools, particularly in areas where the population was declining, but the folks who were left didn't want to see the neighborhood school closed. And that would work against him, I think.
I mean, this is an important issue, not just, you know, this is not Cairo we're talking about, this is Chicago.
Yeah.
And so this has at least potentially some bearing on the statewide political scene. Suzanne Mendoza, the comptroller, has been mentioned as a possible candidate. My suspicion is, not having polled on this yet, she can't give us an answer as to whether she's going to be running or not. She hasn't ruled it out. And also, Chicago is a huge economic engine for the state of Illinois. There's a fair amount of anti-Chicago sentiment elsewhere in Illinois, but where would we be without, you know, the Windy City? Let's talk about what sort of effect this might have beyond just Chicago. Mendoza, starting with that. I mean, you think she's up for being the mayor of Chicago? I mean, the incumbent says it's the best job in the world.
I think the assets that she would have going forward is she has personal charisma. She's a very engaging individual. She has a way of coming across as being really nice, but sticking it to people.
Yeah.
You can just ask the governor. She's a constant thorn in his side.
The velvet dagger, yeah.
Yeah, and yet the issues on which she's getting him are all good government type issues.
Right.
You know, you should put your office people on your own payroll. You should tell us how many bills that you're sitting on, so I, as the comptroller, can figure out how to deal with it. She has that kind of thing. She's a Latina. She's had experience in the legislature. She's had experience as a city official in the city of Chicago. Now, the one, if you will, maybe drawback against her is that were she to run, people would attack her as being kind of a Mike Madigan protege. Because when Madigan, when she was in the House, Madigan, of course, was the House Speaker.
Yeah.
And laid out by Capital Facts today, Rich Miller, he pointed out that she kind of has the ability to do both right now, right? She can continue running for comptroller. She's not ruling out the option to run for Chicago mayor. Presumably, if J.B. Pritzker were elected governor and she were to win comptroller, she could petition and garner signatures, run for Chicago mayor. If she loses, and she could stay at comptroller, and if she wins, Pritzker gets to appoint a comptroller.
Nobody wants to lose an election. I mean, they just want to keep going and going. I mean, I think there had been some growing sentiment that perhaps Mendoza might at some point be a gubernatorial candidate. Is that entering into her decision here? I mean, you can be both. I mean, have we ever had somebody who's been mayor and governor? I don't know that we have.
Not at the same time.
At least not formally.
Yeah, I was thinking back. There were occasions when the mayor of Chicago had pretty much say-so.
Right.
And people say, oh yeah, it was Mayor Daley. But if you go back a little bit further, Big Bill Thompson worked closely with Governor Small.
Yeah.
And some people would argue worked closely with Al Capone. This was back in the 20s, which actually was before I actually started as a reporter. But it's the kind of thing where Chicago being the nexus of the economic strength of the state of Illinois, and Springfield being the capital, the two leaders have to work together
Right.
to accomplish things.
Okay. Let's stay on that topic about leaders working with each other to accomplish things. Let's say that, for the sake of argument, we're still a long way from Election Day. Let's say that the polls right now, what was the spread, 16 points for JB? Let's say JB beats Rauner. Will he be able to work with Madigan? Because just because there's been a Democrat in the governor's mansion doesn't always mean that the two have been able to work together, the governor's office with the legislature. Or if JB becomes, Pritzker becomes governor, is this a kumbaya moment? They just join hands at the campfire and raise our taxes to a bazillion percent, or whatever they're supposed to be doing. I mean, is this something where we might see a possibility where we have all oars in the water rowing in a clear direction?
Well, not according to Leader Durkin in his recent press conference, who basically said the Republicans are going to fight tooth and nail any chance at this graduated income tax. So definitely not with the Republicans. There's no kumbaya if JB's elected.
If you look back at it historically, Madigan has been in the legislature since 1971. He came in, Richard Ogilvie was governor, a Republican. Then came Dan Walker, a Democrat. Then came Jim Thompson for 4 terms. Then Jim Egger, then George Ryan, then Rod Blagojevich and Pat Quinn. Madigan's relationship with the Republican governors was a lot closer, and they were rowing the same way, much more frequently than with Dan Walker. Dan Walker was at the thorn in the side to establishment Democrats. He got elected on kind of what today we would call a progressive platform, anti-Daley, in the wake of the '68 convention and the chaos in the streets that ensued. He was supported by a lot of liberals. He was a populist. He walked Southern Illinois, walked the state in his, in his work shirt and his red bandana, and came across as a man of people. Yeah. But he was not able to govern effectively because he chose to fight Daley. And Daley took him out in the primary in '76 with then Secretary of State Mike Hollett. And then Jim Thompson won his first term because basically after beating after beating Walker, Daley kind of forgot about the race. And in Thompson's years, he never had a Republican-controlled General Assembly, but he got an awful lot done because he was able to get along with people. Same for Edgar. Same for George Ryan in his one term. The difficulty that Blagojevich had with Madigan was that Blagojevich was a flat-out liar. And among other things, and he's now sitting in the federal penitentiary out in Colorado because of that. But
I mean, to the point where they had to write his stuff, promissory notes, some sort of thing.
Yeah, his second year, he had to sign memoranda of understanding where he said, in essence, I'm promising you in writing that what I pledged to you with a handshake, I won't go back on.
My handshake counts.
And historically, Republican governors have worked well with Madigan, better than Blagojevich, better than Pat Quinn. Madigan basically ignored Quinn. He was hostile to Blagojevich. And so the expectation is if you come in, and Pritzker will come in with not an anti-union, pro-business agenda, he won't be trying to do away with prevailing wage, do away with collective bargaining. And so I think they would be able to fundamentally agree.
Flip the question a bit. If Rauner wins, what can we expect? I mean, can we expect another budget impasse? Can we, now Democrats who control the legislature, the voters have spoken. It's serious. It's clear that Rauner has a mandate. Can we expect more than what we've seen in the last 4 years? And specifically on budget issues, personally, I think that Rauner's perhaps most vulnerable, not on folks going without social services. That's serious enough in and of itself. But the interest cost, this is what futzing about costs us in millions upon millions of dollars that we're just paid to satisfy.
Billions, actually.
Well, thank you. I was trying to be nice. Millions are part of billions.
Part of it is, we know for a fact that Rauner will have to deal, if he's reelected, he'll have to deal with the Republican Senate. If every Republican on the ballot seeking election to the Illinois Senate is elected on November 6th, they still won't have 30.
You said Republican Senate, I think you meant Democratic Senate.
No, if every Republican on the ballot
Right.
is elected,
Right.
Republicans still won't have 30. That's
Right,
what I meant to
right,
say.
okay.
They'll have maximum 29.
Okay, all right.
And in the House, the odds of them picking up enough they'd have to, what is it? They'd have to pick up like 8 seats.
Rauner's hoping for 9.
Eight.
Or 9 seats, yeah, because it would be a tie with 8. They'd have to pick up 9 seats. And I don't see that happening simply because there are more safe Democrats, roughly 2/3 of the Democrats who are running don't have anybody opposing them.
Yeah.
And there's only like 4 or 5 Republicans. So there are more seats at play that are Republican controlled now.
Yeah.
And I don't see Madigan losing his majority.
Sure.
And so the question is, I guess, will Bruce Rauner realize that part of the art of governing involves compromising with the other side? You may not agree with them, but
Sure.
you have to realize to make anything happen, I need 60 votes in the House, 30 votes in the Senate. How do I get there? Maybe I have to settle for half a loaf.
Right.
Famously, his education director, and you wrote about this, said that, well, he likes, 90% of the bill, but he's going to veto it anyway. I'm thinking to myself, good grief. All the years I watched that, if some governor was told, you can get 90% of what you're looking for, would that governor have said, oh no, I need that other 10%? Heck no.
And not only with the other side, compromising with the other side, we saw in the primary elections, Governor Rauner lost a lot of his conservative base, not only from voters, but I think within, the legislature. He's going to have to work with the Republican side too, that kind of lost some faith in him.
I mean, with the conservative base, my question would be, how much would Republicans who vote, how much do they view Michael Madigan as just an Illinois version of Hillary Clinton, i.e. anybody but? Doesn't that come to play? And we have the midterms coming up here, obviously. Is a blue wave going to subsume, make it even amplify what might already be a Democratic trend in Illinois?
I think it will certainly help Democrats, and it's not going to do any favors for Republicans, because the poll you alluded to also talked about how Illinois voters looked at Donald Trump. And the bottom line was they had negative feelings toward Trump, not as much as they had towards Rauner, but he was still underwater.
Sure.
So by and large, and Hillary Clinton won Illinois by a large margin. Large margin, pardon me.
Yeah. And Rauner wisely probably has done everything he can to distance himself from Trump. How many times has he said Donald Trump's name? Not very often. And so
He did offer some praise at the state fair for the first time since I've covered him. I think in an attempt to appeal to some of those conservative voters that were present at the state fair on Republican Day, Governor's Day, just saying that he's addressing trade in a proper way. He did call out, I think that same week, the president had called a woman a dog in a tweet, so he did, denounce that behavior. But
I'm in favor of low unemployment, a raging stock market, and peace in the Koreas.
So the policy side of things, he did show some support for President Trump.
Yeah, and I would say, at least in my mind, in my perception of the two people, having watched politicians for a long time, Rauner is not nearly as crass, disrespectful an individual as Donald Trump. Rauner does not go beyond the bounds of civility as it was once understood, whereas our president tends to do that whenever he gets aggravated, and he's got his fingers there on the phone tweeting.
Yeah. Well, speaking about the bounds of civility, let's talk about Lou Lang, the lawmaker from Kankakee.
Actually, he's a Democrat from Skokie.
Skokie,
Yeah,
I am
Skokie.
so sorry, Skokie. Kankakee, Skokie, there's too many K's in the world. Thank you.
No, that's what happens when your job for 20-some years at the Sun-Times is to cover legislative elections.
You
learn about all kinds of different places. Yeah.
The Democratic lawmaker from Skokie, he had requested himself an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment leveled against him by Marianne Loncar couple, 3 months ago. I can't remember. It's been a while. And the Inspector General, while not releasing any reports herself, or because that stuff, unless proven, it's my understanding the Inspector General has no authority to make reports public. It has to go through a process. But she apparently has issued a letter to Mr. Lang saying that the accusation was unfounded. Does he get his leadership positions back? He, after consultation with the Speaker, he resigned his leadership positions. Does he now get to ascend again, or is he a backbencher, so to speak?
Well, that would depend on the will of the Speaker. In the legislature, those types of positions, those leadership positions, fall within the purview of the party's caucus leader. So in other words, Madigan gets to name the deputies, the assistants, and so on. Yeah. Representative Jim Durkin from the western suburbs does it on the Republican side, just like Senator John Cullerton, the Senate President, does it for the Dems. And Senator Bill Brady from Bloomington does it for the Republicans. So yeah, Madigan could put Lang back in that position.
Will he?
I'm guessing that he won't do it immediately, but ultimately I think he will.
Okay. Why? I mean, I have my own theory.
One of the reasons, if you do it now, you're going to get criticism.
Sure.
If you hold off until after the election
Right.
and do it, then that's not an issue.
Sure.
And as a matter of managing the business of the House, they're not going to be in session until after the election. They don't come
Sure.
back until the week before Thanksgiving.
Right.
So you could argue, we don't really need a leader at this point because legislatively there's not really much going on.
Yeah, and there's plausible deniability about I waited till after the election because that was the reasonable and practical time and to do it.
And in quotes, the politically expedient time.
Political expedience. But let's not dismiss this outright. The accuser, Loncar, did not cooperate with the investigation that was initiated at the request of Representative Lang. She said that she felt that this was a rigged, so to speak, process, that the process itself was so skewed against her and people similarly situated to her, that it can't be trusted, it can't be used. Does she have a point here? I mean, is this investigation, the legislative inspector general, the Julia Porter was an interim one. I mean, do we still need to fix this? Might Loncar have a point that the process isn't what it could be?
I'm going to let Charlie take this one because he had a good comment prior to the taping about the leaders electing the Inspector General.
Yeah, the Inspector General, it wasn't Mike Madigan tapping Julie Porter and saying, hey, come take care of this and cover up for Lou Lang. It was a joint decision among the leaders, the four leaders, to name that person to that office. And I think Julie Porter came with a sterling reputation.
Correct.
There were no questions about her integrity, her intelligence, her commitment to public service. And if I'm the complainant, but I won't come in, and, well, I take it back. Lang asked that this matter be investigated. But if I'm sort of the instigator of the investigation, and I don't come in to tell my story, how can the judge make any decision other than saying, which she did, because of the preponderance of evidence does not support Loncar's allegations that you engaged in misconduct, I am closing the matter.
Yeah.
Porter wrote that in a letter to Lang that became public. It was published in the Chicago newspapers.
And not only how can the judge make the ruling, but also it kind of brings into question, I don't want to dismiss her allegations, but what was the point if we weren't going to really dig into this and present your case rather than just to the media? The Inspector General, the Legislative Inspector General is there, attempted to contact her through snail mail, email, Facebook. And
smoke signals,
yeah,
carrier pigeons.
she did not, she didn't want any part of it. And,
Well, I mean,
how do you move forward?
Well, I mean, I think you can draw one of two conclusions, possibly. One is she was mad at Lou Lang because she didn't get her medical marijuana bill advanced she didn't end up with the legislation she wanted, so this is payback because she didn't think Lang was doing what she wanted, so it's payback, which was not a good thing. or she was actually had a case and it remains a he said, she said. A lot, she didn't help herself by saying that Lang was offered a $175 million bribe, which was laughable on its face. And so a lot of what she said that could be tracked down, the $175 million bribe that was apparently made with bunches of people in the room, that was easily disproven, and there were other allegations that Lang had offered to help her ex-husband bury her or something along that, and he denied
Which he
it.
denied
So,
that. But
yes.
there was a part, I believe it was in the Chicago Tribune, I think I read about one of her allegations of him having his hand on her lower back.
Correct.
There were witnesses that possibly agreed to seeing that a couple times or two, and just
Yeah.
reminded Lang and other members of the House and the Senate to really make sure that they're presenting themselves in a professional way.
And don't swear.
And
Don't use
swear.
profanity.
Yell. And don't yell.
Which I thought was had some degree of amusement factor. I mean, hopefully Speaker Madigan will take this to heart and put signs on the walls of his office, no four-letter words, because we know that really wouldn't happen anyway. But just to remind folks that they should comport themselves as elected officials. We're almost out of time, but quickly, let's talk about marijuana.
Why not? Why not end it there?
Why not? It is now.
I tried it once, but I didn't inhale.
Yeah, I did. I never inhale anything or any time. It's now become the law of the land, and this seems somewhat of a shift of positions, frankly, for the governor. He signed this bill to allow folks who have been prescribed opioids to use medical marijuana. Is this a shift from a governor who previously had been somewhat resistant to expanding the medical marijuana program? Is that a shift to what difference might this really make for folks who really need help?
I think this is a big shift, and also at the press conference, the bill signing event, he did mention there could be more changes, there could be more additions, more provisions coming to the medicinal marijuana program. He wasn't willing to discuss what those were, but it was a possibility, or a possibility, possibility. So I think that was interesting to see, and I do think this is going to help a lot of people. I think there was wide support for this measure, not only from the legislature, but also the general public, knowing how deadly and seeing the horrible effects of the opioid epidemic that we do have. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have to see. And with that, we're out of time. So thanks for joining us on Capitol View, and we'll see you again next week.